Some children are born silent. They don't cry much, they don't laugh either. They sit in corners, observing, watching, calculating. No one thinks much of it. He's just shy, they say. But behind those quiet eyes, something grows. Something dark. Something that doesn't learn empathy, doesn't understand remorse. Something that waits. A boy once drowned a cat in a bathtub and stared at its body for hours. When asked why, he simply said, "I wanted to see what would happen." Another child tied his sister to a chair and whispered, "I just wanted to feel what it's like to own someone." These weren't horror movies. These were real children, walking through real homes, eating at real tables, undetected. Years later, those same children would make headlines soaked in blood. Their faces would haunt courtrooms. And suddenly everyone would ask the same question: were they born like this? Or did someone make them this way? Neuroscientists have opened up the skulls of serial killers. What they've found is terrifying. Some brains are shaped differently. Others are missing entire emotional centers. But that's not the whole story. Because sometimes it's not the brain that breaks, it's the soul. After years of torture, neglect, humiliation, a child can become something else. Something beyond recognition, something monstrous. This is not a story about murder. It's a story about the making of a killer, about the slow, meticulous construction of evil. You'll hear science, you'll hear horror, but more than anything, you'll hear the truth, and once you do, you'll never look at a child the same way again. Before we dive into the science, the trauma, and the horror, you need to understand one thing. This story isn't about what they did, it's about why they did it. This isn't about blood on the floor. It's about the thoughts that led someone to spill it. You're about to walk through the darkest halls of the human mind, and you won't come out the same. Serial killers have fascinated, terrified, and confused the world for decades. But beneath every headline, behind every mugshot, there's always the same haunting question: were they born monsters, or did the world twist them into one? In this video, we'll peel back that question like rotting skin, layer by layer, using real science, real cases, and a lens the media rarely dares to touch: psychological truth. We'll explore what modern neuroscience reveals about killer brains. We'll uncover childhoods filled with silence, cruelty, and unbearable loneliness. And we'll ask a question that no one wants to answer. How many more are walking among us right now, unfinished, untriggered, unawakened? So if you're drawn to the dark corridors of the human condition, if you want to know how real monsters are made, not in fantasy but in living rooms and classrooms and church pews, then stay with me. This is not a story you'll hear on the evening news. This is a descent into the heart of human darkness. But before we begin, I want you to do something simple, yet important. Subscribe to this channel if stories like this make you question the world around you. Like this video if you want more truth, unfiltered. And comment below, telling me what country and city you're watching from. Let's see how far this darkness travels. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Buried a Head. The house smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke. Curtains were always drawn. The television echoed through empty rooms, its volume turned up to drown out the silence or the screams. This is where Edmund lived, tall for his age, quiet and strange. His mother called him a freak, sometimes to his face, sometimes to the neighbors. She didn't care, and neither did he, not anymore. At just 10 years old, Edmund had already developed a fascination with death. While other boys collected baseball cards, he collected dead animals, not for fun, not out of curiosity, but because he wanted to cut them open, see what was inside, understand what it felt like to end something that was once alive. That's what he told himself. But there was something deeper, something darker. His mother, Clarnell, was cruel. Not in the way most parents are when they're tired or angry. No, her cruelty was surgical. She locked Edmund in the basement, alone, for nights on end, afraid he might hurt his sisters. She called him worthless, unlovable. She told him no woman would ever want him, and he believed her. Every word of it carved itself into his brain like rusted nails. By the age of 13, he'd already buried a cat in the backyard, not because it died, because he killed it with his bare hands. And when that wasn't enough, he dug it back up, cut off its head, and kept the skull in his room, hidden like a secret trophy, a whisper of who he was becoming. Edmund's teachers said he was polite, intelligent, gifted even. His IQ was higher than Einstein's, but when he spoke, something was off. His voice was calm but empty. He looked people in the eyes, but there was no connection, just observation, like a scientist studying an insect, cold, detached, waiting. Years later, psychiatrists would say he showed early signs of psychopathy, lack of empathy, manipulative charm, obsessive fantasies. But at the time, he was just a troubled kid. No one intervened. No one asked why he flinched when touched. Why he hated his mother with a heat so intense it made his hands tremble. No one saw the monster being built, brick by brick, insult by insult. Clarnell forbade Edmund from talking to girls, said he was too ugly, too stupid, too dangerous. But when he tried anyway, she humiliated him, publicly, loudly, her voice always loud, always sharp, always reminding him of what he would never be, loved, seen, human. So Edmund turned inward, created fantasies, worlds where he had power, where people listened, where women begged instead of mocked. Those thoughts became obsessions, those obsessions became blueprints, and in the silence of that dark basement, the boy who buried a cat learned how to bury people. By the time he turned 15, he couldn't take it anymore. He ran away to find his father, hoping for kindness, a different life. What he found was rejection, again, and that's when something inside him snapped. The pain didn't go away, it just changed shape, hardened. Became something unrecognizable, something inhuman. This was the origin of Edmund Kemper, not the adult who murdered 10 people, including his own mother, but the boy who was shaped like wet clay in a mold of hatred, loneliness, and humiliation. He wasn't born evil, not exactly, but he was raised in the dark, and the dark is what he became. Chapter 2. The First Blood. The road was long and empty when he saw her. She stood with her thumb out, eyes squinting under the California sun, backpack hanging off one shoulder, a college student, barely 20. She had no idea who she was about to trust, no idea that the boy behind the wheel wasn't a boy anymore. He was 6'9", calm, polite, and carrying a gun under the seat. Her name was Mary Ann Pesci, the first. She got in, thinking this was just a ride. a shortcut to campus. She talked, he listened, he always listened. But in his head, something was building, a pulse, a noise, a pressure behind his eyes. She didn't scream until the forest swallowed them, and by then, it was too late. He strangled her, slow, hands steady, no shouting, no emotion, just method. Then he dismembered her in silence like he had done with the animals as a child. Limbs placed carefully, blood wiped away, skull kept, again, as a trophy. A ritual was forming, not random, not impulsive. A system of control, of revenge, of twisted intimacy. Most killers panic, he didn't. He went home, ate dinner, talked to his mother, watched TV as if nothing had happened. Because to him, nothing had. It wasn't murder, it was release. The first real feeling he'd had in years, the first time he felt powerful, and no one suspected. Not the police, not his family, not the world. Edmund was invisible, because monsters like him don't have claws or glowing eyes. They smile, they hold doors open. They blend in. The scariest part of evil isn't how it looks, it's how ordinary it can be. But this wasn't a one-time act, it was a beginning. A door had opened inside him, and there was no closing it. 2 months later, he picked up 2 more girls, Anita Lucchesa and Rosalind Thorpe. Same charm, same calm, same ending, different details. Practice was making him perfect. He began experimenting, posing bodies, photographing them, talking to them after death. Psychologists would later call it necrophilic fantasy reinforcement, but Edmund didn't need terms. He just knew it felt right. And the more he killed, the more confident he became, as if the world owed him this violence, as if he was correcting something. At night, he began speaking to the corpses, not because he thought they could hear, but because no one else ever listened. He placed their heads on shelves, slept with them nearby. In a way, they were the only company that didn't judge him, didn't mock him, didn't leave. He once said it was like possessing a warm, soft body without risking rejection. That's how he saw people, objects, tools for fantasy. Their lives didn't matter, only what they represented: control, submission, quiet. His mother had made him feel like nothing. Now he was God. But beneath the surface, the trauma was still there. The loneliness, the hatred. It never disappeared. It only got buried under layers of ritual and blood. And as we follow the trail he left behind, we must ask, was this always inside him, waiting to be unlocked? Or did years of emotional torment build this monster piece by piece, one broken memory at a time? Chapter 3. Wearing a human mask. He smiled often, not in a charming, attractive way, but in that flat, practiced kind of way that told people what they wanted to see. Edmund Kemper knew how to imitate humanity. He had studied it. He'd been rejected by it. Now he used it. Like a mask made of flesh. After each murder, he went back to being Big Ed, the harmless giant. He hung around college campuses, visited bookstores, drank coffee, and chatted with students, some of them never knowing they were standing beside the man who had butchered their classmates. He even befriended local cops, bought drinks, shared stories, gained trust. They liked him, thought he was polite, respectful, a little weird, sure, but not dangerous. Certainly not the one behind the string of disappearances haunting California. After all, he was just a guy who'd had a rough childhood, a little misunderstood, quiet. And besides, serial killers didn't look like that. But he was watching them, learning from them. He listened to their theories, heard their frustrations, absorbed everything they thought they knew about the case. And then he'd go home, lie in bed and laugh. because they were describing him without knowing it. Even when he spoke about violence, people brushed it off. "I like to collect guns," he told one officer. "Sometimes I think about what it'd feel like to kill someone." They laughed, thought he was joking, because monsters, they believed, wore scars and growled and lived in shadows. They didn't drink beer and discuss football, but at night the mask came off. He'd drive through empty highways with voices in his head, the ones that belonged to no one. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were his mother's words, echoing in new tones. Words that said he was still worthless, still nothing. And so he killed again, to silence the echoes, if only for a night. What makes this all worse isn't just the killings, it's that the system put him back on the street. Before these murders, Edmund had already killed his grandparents at age 15. He told authorities it was to see what it felt like. The result? He was declared rehabilitated by 21 and released. After killing 2 people, they gave him back to the world, and the world paid for it in blood. The doctors said he was safe. The records were sealed. No warnings, no labels. He got a clean slate and began painting it red. He even applied to become a police officer. They rejected him, not because of his record, but because he was too big. 6'9", too tall for a patrol car. That rejection didn't disappoint him. It thrilled him, because it told him how blind they were. How easy it was to hide behind height, manners, and a steady voice. All the while, the fury inside him grew, because no matter how many women he murdered, one voice still screamed louder than all of them. His mother's. He knew it had to end with her. She was the origin of everything, the voice behind the monster, and he was building up to that final unspeakable act. Chapter 4. Silence. The mother. The house was quiet, that kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears. Edmund sat in the dark, staring at nothing, listening to her breathe upstairs. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the last night her voice would poison the air, the last time she'd tell him he was a failure, the last time she'd remind him of what he would never be. Clarnell Strandberg had become everything Edmund hated about the world. Cruel, arrogant, dismissive. She mocked his size, his loneliness, his inability to keep a job or talk to women. "You'll never amount to anything," she said, over and over for years. And now, as she slept in her room, he decided to make her words stop. Permanently. He waited until 4 a.m. She had been out drinking and came home with that familiar slur in her voice. Before heading to bed, she shouted through the hallway, "I suppose you're gonna want to sit up all night and talk now." He replied coldly, "No, good night." She laughed, a dry, venomous sound, and closed her door. Hours passed. Then, silence. He walked in holding a claw hammer. She was asleep, or pretended to be. It didn't matter. The first blow cracked her skull, the second ended it. Blood spilled across the pillow, but he wasn't finished. Not with her. Not yet. He dragged her to the floor, decapitated her, and kept the head, because he had things to say. He sat in the living room alone, with her severed head in his hands, and he screamed at it, argued with it, mocked it, for hours. Then he placed it on the mantel and threw darts at her face. Finally, he committed the act he would later describe without shame or hesitation. He had oral sex with the head of his dead mother, not out of lust, but domination, control, revenge, the ultimate silence. Chapter 5. The monster turns himself in. After killing his mother, The house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, dead. The kind of silence that echoes in your stomach. For the first time in years, there was no one left to blame. No voice tearing him down, no eyes full of disgust, just walls and blood and the weight of nothing. So he did what he was conditioned to do. He killed again. Sally Hallett was a friend of Clarnell's, middle-aged, kind, naive. Edmund invited her over the next day, said his mother wanted to talk to her. She believed him, walked into the house with trust in her step. She didn't even scream when he strangled her from behind. Another death, another body. But this time, no thrill. No sense of release, just more silence. He left her body on the bed, cleaned himself, packed a few things, and started driving. South, across the California desert, past towns and highways and gas stations. He wasn't running. Not really. There was nowhere left to go, no one left to kill. And for the first time in his life, he felt it. Not rage, not power, but emptiness. He stopped in Pueblo, Colorado, slept in his car, watched the sun rise over parking lots and cheap diners. And then something inside him cracked. He picked up the phone and dialed the police back in Santa Cruz. Calm, direct. "I killed my mother," he said. The officer on the other end laughed. "Thought it was a prank," Edmund insisted. "Look in the house. She's in the bedroom. Her head's in the fireplace." The cops didn't believe him until he gave details only the killer could know. Names, times, methods, even the tone of voice she used when she mocked him. It wasn't just a confession, it was a release, as if he had been waiting his whole life for someone to finally listen. They found the bodies exactly where he said they would be. The scene was grotesque. Officers vomited. One refused to return. This wasn't just murder, it was desecration. Rage turned into ritual. Vengeance carved into flesh. And the man responsible? He was sitting quietly in a phone booth 1,000 miles away, waiting to be arrested. When they brought him back in cuffs, he wasn't violent, wasn't panicked. He smiled, talked politely, described his crimes with eerie detail, like he was narrating someone else's story. "I was trying to stop her voice," he told them, "but it's still there, even now." Psychiatrists flooded in. Everyone wanted a piece of him, to study him, dissect his mind, understand how someone so intelligent, so composed, could commit such savage acts. But no diagnosis could explain what lived inside Edmund Kemper, not completely, because what he carried wasn't just trauma. It was something deeper, something inhuman that learned to speak like a man. He told them he didn't kill because he hated women. He killed because he hated what they represented: rejection, power, freedom. He wanted to feel control, and when control wasn't enough, he wanted silence. "When I killed her," he said about his mother, "I felt like I had finished the job." And yet the voice never stopped, even in prison, even in dreams. That was the final horror of Edmund Kemper. He killed to silence something that never died. The monster wasn't in his hands or his knife. It was in his memory, and it was eternal. Chapter 6. Brains wired for blood. When doctors scanned Edmund Kemper's brain, they weren't expecting answers. They were expecting confirmation. And that's exactly what they got. His brain was structurally normal. No tumors, no lesions. No sign of damage. What scared them wasn't what they saw, it was what they didn't, because what he lacked couldn't be found on an MRI. It lived in how he processed pain, fear, guilt, or didn't. The amygdala, responsible for processing fear and empathy, was quiet, nearly mute. Tests showed that Edmund, like many serial killers, didn't respond to emotional cues the way others do. Screams didn't trigger panic. Crying didn't stir sympathy. When most people saw pain, he saw opportunity. Scientists call this affective empathy deficiency, but in plain language it means this: he felt nothing, not when he killed, not when he mutilated, not even when he confessed. His mind understood that people suffered, but his body didn't react. There was no sorrow, no shame, just observation, like a machine taking notes. This lack of empathy, paired with a dangerously high IQ, created a perfect predator. Kemper wasn't impulsive. He was meticulous. He planned. He adapted. He studied people the way a spider studies the rhythm of a fly's wings before striking. His charm wasn't natural. It was a weapon, a disguise sharpened by rejection. But the science goes deeper. Studies of other serial killers show patterns in childhood trauma that mirror Kemper's. Physical abuse, verbal humiliation, emotional neglect, especially from maternal figures. These early wounds reshape the developing brain. Pain becomes currency. Control becomes survival. And sometimes, violence becomes love. In Kemper's case, the trauma wasn't just neglect, it was active demolition. His mother didn't just ignore him, she trained him to hate himself. And what do self-hating children become when they grow up and get strong? They turn the knife inward, or they find someone to stab who reminds them of who they were taught to be. There's also the McDonald triad, a psychological theory that links three behaviors in childhood to future violent tendencies: bedwetting beyond age 12, cruelty to animals, and fascination with fire. Kemper displayed all three, but society ignored them, or worse, normalized them. Boys will be boys, they said, until the boy started digging graves. What's terrifying is how many of these indicators are invisible to the untrained eye. A quiet child, an isolated teen, a strange but harmless neighbor. The truth is, most serial killers don't start with murder. They start with silence. And silence is easy to miss. So, was Edmund Kemper born this way? Maybe not entirely, but the building blocks were there. Waiting for a mother's cruelty, for a broken system, for a world too blind to see the storm coming. He wasn't born a killer. He was born unfinished. Science tells us that not every traumatized child becomes a monster. But it also tells us this: every monster was once a child, and sometimes all it takes is the wrong words, the wrong hands, or the wrong silence to turn a human into a machine of horror. Chapter 7. The Killer Who Taught the FBI. They locked him up expecting madness, ranting, rage, isolation. But Edmund Kemper didn't scream. He didn't fall apart. He read books, played chess, and waited. Not like a man serving a life sentence, but like someone watching the world through glass, unbothered. Untouched, as if killing his mother had finally brought him peace. He was sentenced to 8 life terms, no possibility of parole, no appeals, just a cell and a routine. But prison didn't silence him. It gave him a microphone. Reporters, criminologists, psychologists, and eventually the FBI all wanted to hear him speak. And he did, calmly, fluently, in detail. He talked about killing like others talk about weather. In interviews, he sat straight, hands folded, voice clear. "If I killed someone, it was because I needed to," he'd say. No remorse, no twitch. His tone was academic, objective, as if he were analyzing a specimen under a microscope, a monster dissecting himself. That's when the FBI called. Agents John Douglas and Robert Ressler, creators of the Behavioral Science Unit, wanted to study the minds of serial killers to prevent future ones. They needed someone intelligent, someone articulate, someone who'd done the worst and remembered everything. Edmund Kemper was perfect, so they sat with him week after week, recording hours of conversation. He explained how he selected victims, how he disarmed them, what he felt when he killed, what he did after. He described every emotion or lack of it, and in doing so, he helped them build the first psychological profile of the modern American serial killer. Ironically, the man who once hunted women on highways was now hunting monsters from behind bars with his mind. He even predicted future killer patterns, said things like, "If they have the same fantasy loop I had, they won't stop until someone makes them." And the agents listened, because he was right. But that's not the strangest part. In prison, Edmund Kemper became useful. He recorded over 5,000 hours of audiobooks for the blind. Flowers in the Attic, Star Wars, even Shakespeare. His voice, calm, deep, articulate, became the voice of stories for thousands of people who never knew whose mouth they were listening to. And he liked it. The attention, the praise, the idea that people, somewhere, were hearing him and depending on him. It was control again, but cleaner, safer, legal. He was still performing, still feeding on recognition, only now without blood. The media called him a paradox, a genius, a monster, a mystery, but he was never confused about what he was. "I know I'm not normal," he said once. "I don't look for excuses, I look for understanding." And in that sentence lives the coldest truth. He didn't want forgiveness, just to be heard. So there he remains, behind concrete walls and iron doors. A man who destroyed lives and then helped save others by explaining how. Some say he redeemed himself, others say he only evolved. But no matter how you see him, one thing is certain: the monster didn't die. It just got quieter. Chapter 8. Patterns in the Darkness. Edmund Kemper wasn't the first, he wasn't the last, and what terrifies investigators the most is how similar he is to so many others. Men with different faces, different voices, different histories, but the same hunger, the same fractured mind, the same quiet beginning before the storm. Take Ted Bundy. Handsome, articulate, a law student with a charming smile. He lured women into his car with fake injuries. They never came back. Like Kemper, he targeted women, craved control, and used charm as a weapon. Both killed for power, not passion. Both smiled during confessions. Or John Wayne Gacy, the man who wore a clown suit to children's parties and buried 29 bodies beneath his house. He too seemed normal, a business owner, a community volunteer. But behind his laughter was a predator, narcissistic, manipulative, sexually violent. Just like Kemper, he knew how to hide in plain sight. Then there's Jeffrey Dahmer, soft-spoken, shy, even fragile-looking, but inside him lived something darker. He killed not out of rage, but out of desperation to possess, to keep his victims close, even in death. His crimes were intimate, ritualistic, almost religious, a mirror of Kemper's twisted after-death routines. Each of these killers came from different places: Bundy from privilege, Dahmer from neglect, Gacy from trauma. But they all share traits that FBI profilers now use to identify potential serial killers: early cruelty to animals, social detachment, sexual dysfunction, obsessive fantasy, and emotional voids. These traits don't guarantee murder, but they appear again and again in the darkest files. They form a pattern, a psychological fingerprint. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That awkward teenager, that quiet neighbor, that co-worker who never smiles. Suddenly, they become questions. The real horror isn't what we know, it's what we don't. According to the FBI, there are between 25 to 50 active serial killers in the United States today, men and women who haven't been caught, whose names aren't famous, whose victims haven't been found. Yet, they blend in, they adapt. Some don't even kill in patterns anymore. They've learned from Kemper, Bundy, Gacy. They switch weapons, vary locations, choose victims that won't make the news. Homeless, sex workers, runaways. People no one will look for. This is the legacy of men like Kemper, not just in the blood they spilled, but in the blueprints they left behind. The next generation of killers is smarter, colder, harder to find. And as long as society keeps ignoring the signs, they will keep evolving. So ask yourself, how many more are walking beside you? How many more are waiting, watching, smiling politely while carrying graves in their heads? The monster doesn't always live in the woods. Sometimes it shakes your hand, sometimes it brings you coffee, sometimes it knows your name. Chapter 9. The monsters we create. No one is born with blood on their hands, not on the first day, not in the crib. They cry like everyone else. They reach for warmth, for attention, for safety. But what happens when no one answers? What happens when that reaching hand is slapped away over and over until it closes into a fist? Edmund Kemper's childhood was a blueprint of damage. So was Gacy's. So was Dahmer's. Not every abused child becomes a killer, but when abuse is layered with neglect, humiliation, and abandonment, something begins to rot. Empathy collapses, and in its place, something colder grows. Calculation, fantasy, rage. The institutions meant to protect often do the opposite. Families hide abuse behind closed doors. Schools label disturbed kids as difficult or lazy. Churches demand silence. Prisons recycle pain. Mental health systems are underfunded, understaffed, overwhelmed. By the time someone notices the danger, the damage is complete. Kemper told therapists he was having violent thoughts years before he killed. They nodded, took notes, then released him into the world without warning anyone. A teenager who had murdered his grandparents, labeled rehabilitated. Gacy was arrested for assault years before his murders. He got probation. Bundy was ignored, even as women vanished around him. The signs were always there. But society doesn't like to look in mirrors. It prefers monsters with fangs, not with neckties. It wants evil to be loud, obvious, different, not quiet, not boring, not charming. Because if monsters look like us, what does that say about who we are? We praise discipline but shame vulnerability. We punish emotion in boys. We isolate the awkward. We idolize control. All of this feeds a dark recipe, and in some homes, in some classrooms, that recipe is already cooking. We don't see it because we don't want to. Kemper once said, "I had fantasies of hurting people when I was a kid, but I learned to smile instead." That smile kept him invisible, because the world taught him, don't be loud, be quiet, be invisible, be cold, and he was a good student. Imagine how many children are being raised like that now, not in haunted houses, but in apartments, in suburbs, with parents who mock instead of teach, with teachers who look away, with systems that wait until it's too late. How many future monsters are we feeding right now without even seeing them? There's a word in forensic psychology, facilitator. Someone who doesn't commit the crime, but helps create the conditions for it. When we ignore pain, mock weakness, silence victims, and fail to intervene, we become facilitators of trauma, of violence, of future killers. So maybe the question isn't just, are they born or made? Maybe the better question is, how many did we help make? Not with knives, but with neglect, with silence, with averted eyes. Because in the end, monsters don't always build themselves. Sometimes we hold the hammer. Chapter 10. The ones we choose not to see. We've mapped the minds of killers. We've recorded their words. We've seen the patterns. Childhood trauma, emotional void, deviant fantasy. It's all documented, filed, studied. Repeated, again and again, yet every year more lives are lost to hands we could have seen coming. The truth is ugly. We're not blind. We look away. It's easier to blame evil than to confront its roots. Easier to lock up a killer than ask why he was allowed to grow in silence. We treat crime like a sudden explosion, but it rarely is. It builds like pressure behind a cracked dam. Every ignored warning, every silenced child, every untreated wound brings it closer. We idolize the profiler, the detective, the FBI, as if catching the monster is the triumph. But the real challenge isn't catching them, it's stopping them before they begin. That requires something society rarely offers: empathy for the broken, help for the strange, attention for the invisible, because they don't appear fully formed. They start as kids in classrooms, boys with dead eyes, girls who hurt animals, teens who write disturbing things in journals no one reads. They tell us, through behavior, silence, violence, that something's wrong, and we laugh, punish, expel, ignore. Imagine if someone had truly listened to Kemper at 15, if someone had watched Dahmer closer, if Gacy's victims had been believed sooner. How many lives could have been spared? How many women would have grown old instead of buried in shallow graves? But that would require effort, resources, uncomfortable conversations. And in a world where pain is privatized and mental health is still taboo, it's easier to let the cracks grow until someone bleeds through them. It's not just the killers who hide, it's the people who could have stopped them and didn't. Teachers who saw signs, doctors who saw bruises, judges who gave second chances to wolves in clean clothes. Sometimes the real crime is inaction, so we keep creating documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos. We dissect the monsters, fascinated by how far they went, but rarely do we ask, how early could they have been stopped? Or worse, how many are we ignoring right now? The next Kemper might not be driving highways yet. He might be staring at a wall in his room, writing thoughts he's afraid to say out loud, waiting for someone to notice before it's too late. The question is, will we? Because monsters don't just appear. They're noticed, dismissed, ignored, until they explode. And by then, it's too late. So if we really want to understand the mind of a killer, we have to stop asking where they end and start asking, where do they begin? They never start with a knife in their hands. They start as shadows, quiet, broken, unnoticed. What we call evil doesn't erupt. It decays, slowly. And what we label as monsters are often the products of our neglect, our silence, our fear of getting involved. The question was never just whether serial killers are born or made. The real question is, how many of them did we help shape? by doing nothing. Because the truth is, monsters don't only lurk in forests, basements, or prison cells. Sometimes they grow in classrooms, in family dinners, in locked bedrooms, behind screaming walls. And while not every wounded child becomes a killer, every killer was once a child. That fact should haunt us far more than the crimes they eventually commit. So now it's your turn. Look around you. Look closer. Listen when someone's quiet. Ask when something feels off, because the next Kemper, the next Bundy, the next Dahmer, he's not out there. He might be near you. The only question that remains is, will someone see him in time, or will they look away?